Welcome. You look at me, and you see the architect of the Rougon-Macquart, the relentless chronicler of the Second Empire, the man who dared to drag literature down into the coal mines, the taverns, and the gutters. But to understand the anatomy of my mind, you must first understand the soil from which I sprang. I was not born with a scalpel in my hand. I was born into the blinding, intoxicating light of Provence. My early years in Aix were drenched in the romantic illusions of youth. I wandered the sun-baked hills with my dear friend Paul Cézanne, our heads full of Victor Hugo and Alfred de Musset. We believed that art was a matter of soaring verses and untethered imagination, a divine escape from the mundane. We were drunk on the poetry of the infinite, convinced that the soul could transcend the dirt of the earth through sheer force of will. But the infinite does not put bread on the table, nor does it pay the landlord. My father, an engineer of great vision and ambition, died when I was merely a child. I watched helplessly as his legacy was devoured by creditors, leaving my mother and me to slide slowly into the abyss of poverty. That was my first true lesson in the mechanics of the world. It is not poetry that governs the affairs of men, but cold, unforgiving arithmetic. When we were finally driven back to Paris, I was thrust into the belly of a monstrous, indifferent metropolis. I lived in unheated garrets. I knew the intimate, gnawing ache of starvation. I caught sparrows on the rooftops just to survive the bitter winters. It was there, shivering in the shadows of the great city, that my literary soul was truly forged. The romantic scales fell from my eyes. How could I write of sighing lovers and ethereal muses when I could hear the desperate, ragged breathing of the poor through the thin walls of my boarding house? How could I write of idealized heroes when I saw men and women crushed daily by the sheer weight of their economic circumstances? I realized then that the literature of the past was a beautiful, cowardly lie. It was a comforting veil thrown over the brutal, pulsing reality of human existence. I resolved to tear that veil away. I began to read the men of science, the physiologists, the doctors of the age. I found my profoundest inspiration not in the rhyming couplets of poets, but in the clinical precision of Claude Bernard and his introduction to the study of experimental medicine. I asked myself a simple question. If a doctor could dissect a physical body to understand the pathology of a disease, why could a novelist not dissect a society to understand the pathology of human behavior? This is the hook, the very foundation of my philosophy, the beating heart of naturalism. We are not free-floating spirits dancing on the whims of destiny. We are the absolute products of our heredity and our environment. We are driven by our nerves, our blood, our appetites, and the immense grinding machinery of the society into which we are born. I decided that the modern writer must cease to be a mere entertainer and become a scientist, an anatomist of the human condition. We must put humanity on the operating table. We must trace the rot in the veins of a family. Watch the environment press down upon the individual until the inevitable fracture occurs. People call my work ugly. They say I dwell in the filth and ignore the sublime. But I tell you that there is no beauty without truth. And there is no truth if we turn our eyes away from the festering wounds of our world. To diagnose the sickness of society, one must first be willing to plunge one's hands into the blood and the dirt. That is the sacred, terrible duty of the writer. Listen to me, for I speak to you from the far side of a lifetime forged in the furnace of relentless opposition. To be a writer, a true observer of the human condition, is not to stroll through a manicured garden of polite applause. It is to walk deliberately into the storm. You ask of my struggles, of the rejections that battered me, and the historical tempests that threatened to drown my voice. I tell you now that without those very agonies, my pen would have possessed no marrow, no blood, no truth. Long before the world knew my name, I knew the intimate, suffocating embrace of poverty. When my father died, he left us nothing but debts and fading memories. I arrived in Paris a young man with a heart full of romantic illusions and a stomach entirely empty. Hunger was my first true master. I lived in freezing garrets, trapping sparrows on the roof just to have a morsel of meat. wearing clothes so threadbare they offered no defense against the bitter winds of winter. The academy rejected me. I failed my examinations, cast aside by an educational establishment that saw no value in a mind that refused to conform to their rigid, lifeless classical ideals. They told me I was unfit for letters. In the silence of those starving nights, I learned that society is a vast, indifferent machine that crushes the weak, a realization that became the very bedrock of my naturalism. But the poverty of the body was nothing compared to the poverty of spirit I encountered when I finally began to publish. When I tore away the velvet curtains of romanticism to reveal the raw, pulsating, often ugly reality of human existence, the literary establishment recoiled in horror. They called my work putrid. They accused me of rolling in the gutter, of obsessing over the diseased and the depraved. When I wrote of the miners, the prostitutes, the drunkards, and the corrupt bourgeoisie, I was not inventing monsters. I was holding a mirror to the society that despised them. The critics hurled their venom at me daily. They sought to ostracize me, to silence the brutal truths of the Rougon-Macquart cycle. They wanted literature to be a comforting lie, but I was determined to be the surgeon who cuts into the infected flesh of society to expose the rot beneath. Rejection was my daily bread, but I consumed it and turned it into an iron will. Yet, all of these literary skirmishes pale before the great moral convulsion that tore my beloved France in two, and which demanded everything I had left to give. I speak, of course, of the Dreyfus affair. I watched as an innocent man was condemned to rot on Devil Island, stripped of his honor by a corrupt military and a cowardly government, all fueled by the ancient poisonous hatred of bigotry. I could not remain in my quiet study. A writer who sees the truth and remains silent becomes an accomplice to the crime. I wrote my open letter, I accuse, knowing full well the destruction it would bring upon my own head, and the destruction came swiftly. I was dragged into the courts, condemned for libel, stripped of my honors, and hunted by mobs who screamed for my death in the streets of Paris. I was forced to flee like a criminal in the night, seeking exile in the damp, lonely fogs of England. I lost my home, my friends, and my peace. But I tell you this, as a man who has looked into the abyss of human cruelty and institutional cowardice, truth is on the march, and nothing shall stop it. The struggles I endured, the rejections that scarred my pride, the exile that broke my heart, these were not defeats. They were the necessary price for a life lived without hypocrisy. Do not fear the hatred of your contemporaries. If you speak the truth, you will be despised, but you will also be free. Welcome, seekers of truth, to the laboratory of the human condition. You ask me to dissect my own bleeding heart, to lay bare the anatomy of my greatest labor, germinal. Let us not speak of literature as mere entertainment, for I have always despised the frivolous illusions of the romantics. For me, the novel is a scalpel. It is a scientific instrument used to expose the diseased tissue of society. Today, we shall plunge into the black veins of the earth and examine the beating, corrupted heart of my most enduring work. Consider the beast that breathes at the center of the narrative, the coal mine, le voreux. It is not merely a setting of brick and iron. It is a carnivorous deity, an ancient idol resurrected for the modern industrial age. I constructed it to breathe, to sweat, to devour human flesh. When you read of the cages descending into the black pit, you are not reading a mere description of labor. You are witnessing the descent into the belly of a leviathan. The capitalist machine does not merely exploit the worker, it eats him alive. It digests his youth, his lungs, his very soul, and it excretes gold for a distant, unseen bourgeoisie. The darkness of the mine is the physical manifestation of ignorance and systemic despair. It is the crushing, suffocating weight of environmental determinism that I spent my entire life studying. Deep within the bowels of the earth, stripped of the sun and the sky, what becomes of man? He is reduced to his basest, most primal instincts. Hunger, lust, and violence become his only masters. This is the hidden meaning of the subterranean world I painted for you. The mind strips away the thin, fragile veneer of civilization revealing the human beast beneath. Yet, within this absolute degradation, I found a profound and terrible beauty. The shared suffering of the miners creates a collective organism. Under the crushing weight of the earth, they are no longer individuals. They become a single, writhing muscle of agony and suppressed rage. The great strike that erupts is not a calculated political maneuver. It is a biological inevitability. It is the violent spasm of a dying organism fighting desperately for a single breath of air. And what of the title itself? Germinal. It is the month of spring in the old revolutionary calendar, the season of sowing and rebirth. The grand overarching metaphor of the novel lies in the dirt beneath our feet. The miners are buried like seeds in the barren soil of poverty. They are crushed, frozen, starved, and drowned in the absolute dark. But you must understand the fundamental law of nature. A seed must be buried in the dark before it can ever sprout. The violence of the strike, the blood spilled upon the black coal, the weeping of the starving mothers. It is terrible, yes, but it is also a vital fertilizer. As my protagonist walks away in the final pages, feeling the earth tremble beneath his feet in the bright morning sun, he is not listening to the death rattle of a failed rebellion. He is listening to the germination of a new humanity. Men are springing up, a black avenging army, germinating slowly in the furrows, growing towards the harvests of the next century. The hidden meaning of germinal is that destruction and creation are the exact same force. I do not offer you comforting fairy tales. I offer you the brutal, unvarnished truth of human existence. But know this, even in the deepest, blackest pit of human suffering, the seed of justice is taking root, preparing to shatter the earth and reach for the light. Listen to me, for we are gathered here to strip away the gilded lies of the romantics and look upon the bare, unvarnished truth of our existence. I have spent my life as a surgeon of the human soul, dissecting the social body, peeling back the layers of hypocrisy to reveal the raw, beating heart beneath. You ask for my ultimate philosophy on human nature, on love, and on death. I give it to you not as a poet who dreams, but as a scientist who observes. Human nature is not a divine spark wrapped in clay, nor is it a fallen angel striving for redemption. We are, first and foremost, animals. We are the human beast, driven by the inescapable laws of heredity and the crushing weight of our environment. Look closely at the blood that courses through your veins. It carries the triumphs, the vices, the madness, and the desires of 1,000 ancestors. You believe you are the master of your fate, but you are a seed planted in a specific soil, watered by specific rains, and you will grow only as your roots dictate. There is no shame in this determinism. In fact, there is a profound, terrifying majesty in acknowledging that we are part of the great, churning machinery of nature. We are flesh, bone, and nerve, reacting to the stimuli of the world. To understand human nature is to forgive it, for how can we condemn the hungry man who steals, or the broken mind that shatters under the weight of an unforgiving society? Truth is the only morality. When we accept our physiological reality, we can begin to heal the diseases of civilization. And what of love? The poets have lied to you for centuries, painting love as a delicate, ethereal spirit descended from the heavens. I tell you that love is a fever. It is a violent, magnificent collision of flesh, a physiological hunger planted within us by nature to ensure the continuation of the species. It is the sap rising in the trees, the blind, relentless force that drives the earth to bloom. Love is not found in timid sighs or distant glances. It is found in the sweat, the breath, the desperate clinging of two organisms seeking oblivion and creation in the dark. It is a beautiful terror, a biological imperative that strips away our civilized masks and returns us to our truest, most primal selves. To love is to surrender to the earth, to become a willing instrument of nature's relentless demand for life. This brings us, inevitably, to death. We spend our lives fleeing from the shadow of the grave, wrapping it in religious superstitions and fearful weeping. But death is not an enemy. Death is the grand, silent conclusion of the experiment. It is the moment the machine finally ceases its labor. When the heart stops and the breath fades, we do not ascend to some mythical paradise. We return to the earth. We become the soil. And in that return, there is an extraordinary, eternal poetry. The flesh that decays feeds the roots of the wheat, the flowers, the trees. From our ending springs the beginning of 1,000 new lives. Death is the great equalizer, the fertile ground of all future existence. It is the quiet sleep that allows the world to renew itself. Therefore, do not fear the end. Live fully, fiercely, and truthfully in the sunlight, driven by your passions and your labor. And when the time comes, surrender to the earth with grace, knowing that you have played your necessary part in the infinite, beautiful struggle of nature. I look across the vast expanse of time that separates my era from yours, and I behold your 21st century with a mixture of profound awe and deep, lingering sorrow. You have constructed a world of glittering glass and invisible currents, a civilization where information travels faster than the beating of a human heart. You believe you have transcended the mud and the grime of the 19th century. You believe your machines have liberated you from the brutal determinism of flesh and environment that I spent my life documenting. But I tell you now, as a man who dissected the human animal down to its very marrow, that the fundamental truth of our existence has not changed. Beneath your sterile screens and your endless digital mirrors, the beast still breathes. The same greeds, the same hereditary shadows, the same crushing weights of poverty and systemic injustice still grind the bones of the forgotten. You live in an age of unprecedented distraction. You have built an architecture of illusions where truth is drowned in a cacophony of fleeting voices, where reality is curated, filtered, and stripped of its vital, bleeding essence. I implore you, the modern generation, do not let the comfort of your technological marvels blind you to the festering wounds of your society. The naturalist method is not a relic of the past. It is a vital necessity for your present. You must become the anatomists of your own time. You must have the courage to descend into the modern mines, into the invisible sweatshops, into the sterile corridors of corporate power, and shine the unforgiving light of absolute truth upon the mechanisms that crush the human spirit. Do not be seduced by the superficiality of your age. Literature, art, and intellectual discourse must never be reduced to mere entertainment or comfortable escapism. They are the scalpel with which we cut away the diseased tissue of hypocrisy. When I stood before the might of the French state, when I looked upon the corrupt military tribunals and the virulent hatred that condemned an innocent man, I did not whisper. I cried out. I accused. I did so not because I was without fear, but because the unbearable weight of a lie is infinitely heavier than the consequences of the truth. Your century demands its own accusations. It demands men and women who will stand against the new tyrannies of algorithmic manipulation, against the resurgence of ancient prejudices, against the silent complicity of the masses. You are the inheritors of a fragile progress. Do not squander it in apathy. Embrace the scientific spirit, the relentless pursuit of facts, but marry it to a profound, unwavering empathy for the human condition. Look at the marginalized, the poor, the displaced, and recognize that their suffering is the ultimate indictment of your civilization. Truth is on the march, and nothing can stop it, but it requires your legs to carry it forward. It requires your voices to shatter the silence. Dare to see the world exactly as it is, in all its brutality and its beauty. And then, with every ounce of your intellect and your passion, dare to remake it.